As much as I loved the original prototype back in 2009 and how excited I was to eventually get my hands on the sequel, Prototype 2 has been completely wiped from my memory. I remember the excitement of the reveal, going and picking the game up, putting the game in my 360, and ultimately seeing the credits roll, but all that important stuff in between, not even a little bit. How was the story? Did they improve the gameplay or not? Did the game succeed as a sequel? Absolutely no idea, which is why before revisiting the Prototype series, I think fairly I just thought of Prototype 2 as forgettable. Not good or bad, just nothing special. That had to be why I couldn't remember the game, not the fact I've played hundreds of games and only have so much memory capacity. The popular opinion for Prototype 2 seems to be disappointment from what I can gather, but is that because the game wasn't good or the hype of a sequel grew out of hand? I'm not too sure, but nevertheless, after revisiting the original prototype in the last video and finding it to still be good fun, though heavily flawed, I was really excited to jump straight into the sequel. Always the optimist, maybe I'd unfairly forgotten Prototype 2. Hell, maybe it's as good or even better than the original. There was only one way to find out. So after 10 years, how does Prototype 2 hold up today? Is it worth your time revisiting or playing for the first time? And simply, is it better than I remember, or was it rightly forgotten? Let's find out. Just a quick heads up before we get stuck into the video, as I said, I have already covered the original prototype as well, so if you're interested in seeing that video, click the link in the top right hand corner or in the description below, and what the hell, subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Alright, let's get started. One year after the events of the first game, we are introduced to our new protagonist for Prototype 2, US Marine Sergeant James Heller. After Heller returned from a tour in Iraq, he returned to find his wife and daughter had been declared dead, causing him to rejoin the military in the fight for NYZ against the Blacklight virus. We're briefed on the events of the previous outbreaks in Idaho and the events of the first game. On a downward spiral of grief and vengeance, Heller heads straight to the heart of the Red Zone in the hopes of ending it all there and taking as many infected down with him. It's on said mission where Heller's team is killed and he is confronted by Alex Mercer, who after the events of Prototype has now lost faith in humanity. Mercer and Heller have a confrontation which leads to Heller becoming infected with a strain of the virus that gives him with similar superhuman abilities to Mercer, and Heller blacks out. Heller awakes later in a Yellow Zone lab where Gentek scientist Dr. Anton Koenig and Blackwatch Colonel Douglas Rooks are experimenting on him. Heller manages to escape the facility only for Mercer to quickly confront him again and claim Gentek and Blackwatch were responsible for recreating the Blacklight virus, meaning they're responsible for his family's death and not Mercer. He then reveals his plans to take down Gentek and Blackwatch, offering Heller a truce. Not trusting Mercer's word, Heller seeks help from the local pastor, Father Luis Guerra. Through the information provided by the father, Heller sabotages Blackwatch and Gentek operations, gradually consuming his way through Blackwatch until he finds and confronts Koenig. Koenig claims to be on our side as he reveals Blackwatch's super soldier program, codenamed Orion. Heller stops Orion's progress by defeating a super soldier injected with his DNA, and after consuming a head scientist, Heller learns that Koenig was sending Heller on missions to watch and study him for his weaknesses. Heller, enraged at this betrayal, tracks down Koenig only to learn that he also has powers similar to himself and Mercer and is one of several evolved agents planted within Gentek and Blackwatch by Mercer. Heller ultimately defeats and consumes Koenig, where Mercer appears and reveals that he intends to recruit Heller in an attempt to control NYZ. Whilst considering, the father quickly shows Heller a video of Mercer releasing the virus for the second time in Penn Station, Surprise, surprise, and enraged at Mercer's deception, Hela heads out to the Green Zone to hunt down other Evolved. Hela quickly fails this mission as he finds and unwillingly teams up with Gentech Evolved agent Sabrina Galloway, after she reveals she can help him take out Mercer. With Galloway's help, Hela learns that Mercer's real plans are to infect the entire world through White Light, a contaminated vaccine Gentech is releasing that actually accelerates infection. Hela begins to sabotage Mercer's plans, which, well, Mercer doesn't like, and the two face off only for Hela to get easily overpowered. But he cannot be consumed due to what is called his annoying resistant DNA, so Mercer flees. Hela receives a distress call from the father only to arrive as quickly as possible to find him dead after an infected horde was at his apartment. Using the father's phone, Hela reaches out to Athena, a contact of Father Guerra, who is revealed to be Dana Mercer. It's through Dana that Hela learns his daughter Maya is still alive, prompting him to head into the Red Zone to save her. After stopping Blackwatch's second attempt to level Manhattan, Rooks takes Hela's daughter hostage at Gentech headquarters. Hela confronts Rooks, but he also has a daughter and grants Hela free passage out of NYZ. Before Hela can get to Maya, Galloway arrives and kidnaps her, joining forces with Mercer again. We have a final face-off against Mercer where he reveals that he plans to solve all international conflicts and worldly problems by infecting everyone, basically creating a superorganism with Maya's apparent unique DNA being a catalyst. Mercer absorbs all his lackeys and Hela and Mercer go head to head, this time Hela being the victor and consuming Mercer. This causes Hela to explode out and wipe out the infected in NYZ along with most of the Blacklight virus. Using Mercer's memories, Hela locates and frees Dana and Maya, and the story ends with the three overlooking New York, wondering what to do next. And that's the story for Prototype 2. Once again, Prototype 2's story is a bit of a mixed bag. Comparing apples to apples, Prototype 1's story is filled with so much more intrigue and mystery, and the story itself is much more interesting as a result, but it was told terribly with dialogue that brought me to a bore. The roles are reversed here in Prototype 2's story. The story itself is rather by the numbers and predictable, but it is portrayed to the player, in my opinion, much better through engaging characters and their dialogue. First and foremost, James Heller is a really likable protagonist. His motivations are simple, a man with nothing to lose is a dangerous man type, but in between all the serious emotions, he's allowed to crack wise, have fun with these powers, and curse up a storm that made me really enjoy spending 10 or so hours with him. Some people, I'm sure, wanted wall-to-wall edge and Miss Mercer as the lead, but not me. I think humor adds to a more serious topic because it allows rage, hatred, and sadness to breathe and feel like unique emotions, which I did not get from the original and is very much present here.
You sick keep your memories. I'm not touching you.
Heller? James Heller? Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god! Oh my god, no!
Something I also didn't get from the original was a strong connection with Alex Mercer, at least not now, which is why I didn't mind the decision to make him out into the villain because I think it's a logical step in his character. Incredibly intelligent man with little to no regard for humanity shown through his selfish actions who has all the powers a god could ask for. A power trip I think is to be expected, so I have no issue with Mercer becoming this big bad villain. I understand why many did and do. If you're invested in the character and your journey from the original with that character, it can be hard to accept such a change, but again, that wasn't my experience with Mercer. He was just the conduit for my chaotic fun, but it seriously could have been anyone. With all of that being said, Mercer had the potential to be an incredible villain, and instead what we got was an over-the-top cheeseball. Don't get me wrong, his dialogue was rough in the original, but it at least established his character as a broody edgelord, and here in the sequel, he's just so corny. It sticks out so much because the rest of the dialogue is really well performed, I think, but between Mercer's tonal shift and the actual lines he's delivering, it just feels like a vision that's confused. Thankfully, he doesn't go all-out villain until closer to the end, and whilst his dialogue still isn't stellar, Throughout the last moments are where most of my criticisms for his character come to a head. His villain arc just seems rushed. I think the pieces are there and the concept of hunting down Mercer is one with potential, but I mean they ruin all of that in the end, which is disappointing.
Give me my daughter!
No, I don't think so. It's time you gave me something. You see, young Amaya shares your brand of annoyingly resilient DNA. And when she's ready, your daughter will become the mother of the new world!
It's always a brave call to make your original protagonist a villain, because if you do it poorly, not only are people not going to embrace your new character, but they may simply disregard the whole game as a result, and I think that's where a lot of Prototype 2's disdain comes from. That's just not my personal experience though. I do understand why people are coming from with that opinion, because they did not execute supervillain Mercer well enough, which is a shame because I actually really like the plot revolving around White Light. A new virus that's being passed as a vaccine through those cloaking abilities we're all too familiar with and spies within Gentech and Blackwatch. That's good stuff, but the mastermind behind it all just lacks so much. Also, it's unclear as to why Heller gets infected in the first place. He doesn't really add much to Mercer's plans as a man on the inside type, making the decision feel more like a bit of a plot point just to have Heller be our new protagonist rather than anything meaningful. Outside of Mercer though, as I said, the story is a by the numbers sort of affair, and that feels most evident with Mercer's story of world domination, but also means story beats like Koenig or Galloway betraying Heller, or Mercer being unable to consume Heller because of some unique blocker is all just sort of whatever. You see it coming a mile away. I do miss the mystery, the government conspiracies, and those elements that made the original interesting, but at the end of the day, when I look back on my time with Prototype 2's story, I was just more engaged in the moment than Prototype 1. I know I've been pretty critical of the story, which is all fair game. The story isn't anything particularly special, and when it stumbles, boy, does it stumble hard. But as I was experiencing the story, I just didn't really care. I was having fun with it because I think the story has fun with itself. Heller is just someone I had more fun being around. He makes having these abilities seem more fun, like moments when he comes out of a cloak for a one-liner, or mentally torments his victims.
Which one of you is Dr. Trey Carson?
The doctor is out, motherfucker!
His cast of characters, his supporting crew is more interesting and easier to listen to. If we're going off potential, the original Prototype takes the cake in story. But if we're going off execution, both have their flaws, but I simply enjoyed the story more this time around. With that being said, the story isn't this series' strong point. Prototype 2's gameplay is yet another example of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It does so much right. It removes the difficulty spikes, the brutal mission designs that don't utilize the superpowers to their full potential, making the player need to seek out vehicles to survive encounters, a samey looking open world, and adds reason to stick around and explore this chaotic war zone of a world. All of these are great removals that a good sequel should make, but what they also removed, which for me is a cardinal sin, they gutted the abilities for some unknown reason and messed with my favorite aspect of the original, which was the fluidity of the parkour system. I still think Prototype 2's gameplay is an overall improvement, but they messed with features that didn't need messing with. But let's dive into the specifics, beginning with the abilities. First and foremost, let's talk ability removals. Armor is gone, and you can't run around with your shield like a battering ram anymore, limiting defensive options to a more stationary nature. Muscle mass is gone. The various hand-to-hand combinations, special abilities like the hammer toss are gone, and infected and thermal vision are gone. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but these removals take a torture wheel from looking like this to this. Now, if we're splitting hairs, did I use these options all that much in the original? No, I didn't. But removing options is never the answer, just make them more useful, which I do think they did for the remaining options, which I will get to soon. My biggest issue with these removals is all the different combinations that have been thrown out make the combat for Prototype 2 feel at times a lot more button masher heavy, losing that feeling of strategic chaos. I just don't understand removing features and abilities instead of just adding and balancing more. With that being said, many abilities do make a return along with some new ones. The Blade, Claws, Hammer Fist and Whip Fist all return along with the new Tendrils ability in regards to Hella's weapon wheel. There is a new variation of the shield looking a whole lot like Cloister, a biobomb that can be used sneakily or mid-combat, Critical Mass Devastator returns along with two new ones in Pack Leader and Juggernaut Pack, letting you call in backup infected. There is the new Hunter's Vision feeling very Predator-esque, and of course, Consuming and Disguising make their return as well as all the various traversal abilities. You do still have a lot of options to play around with in Prototype 2, especially with the addition of selecting two abilities to use at once, instead of picking between one another in the original, which creates unique combinations, and more importantly, all these abilities feel much more balanced. I was never stuck on just using the Blade or just using the Hammer Fist, and instead mixed it up in combat quite frequently. I know people want to say they nerfed the Blade and Whip Fist, which they definitely did, but I don't think that was a bad thing. They were extremely OP in the original, and the nerf still allows them to be powerful, but not make the likes of the Claws or the Tendrils completely useless. Again, I don't know why they removed the various combinations that accompany these abilities, and in some instances downgraded the ones left in like the Hammer Fist Slam, but if you mix up which powers you use frequently enough, then that can counteract some of the repetition. I'm just thankful I don't need to rely on helicopters and tanks this time around to survive in what I think is Prototype 2's biggest improvement, allowing the player the opportunity to sit in the pocket, use those insane powers, and put on a show. I enjoyed flying around in the choppers and commandeering tanks as much as the next guy, but I want them to be an option, not a necessity, which is where Prototype 2 shines. The game allows you to be as creative as you want. Use the Blade's Tornado Spin, the Hammer Fist Spike, the lunge of the Claws, the lockdown effect of the Tendrils, the sweeping or stabbing effect of the Whip Fist. Mix and match your abilities for cool combinations. Call in a pack of hunters, launch into the sky and take off a helicopter's gun to fire back at the enemy. Perfectly time your shield's block to stab into your foes. Use a biomass bomb to take out a group of soldiers. Grab a rocket launcher to blow up nearby explosives. I mean, just go nuts. Yes, you can be beaten down and defeated if you aren't careful, but it happens a handful of times, if that, and allows the player to feel that god complex that Prototype does so well. That god complex does mean the boss encounters are forgettable. The evolved agents don't change up too much from one another, the Hydra are sort of whatever, and whilst the Mercer battle is a bit more challenging, it's still a bit of a cakewalk. I'm okay with that personally if it's this or the original's difficulty, but it's not perfect. I love me some chaos, and that's where I think Prototype is at its best, but my favourite part of the original Prototype was the game's traversal, and whilst I don't think it's by any means bad here, it just isn't as good as the first game. The original Prototype's movement felt much more like a parkour system as you flipped and dipped around oncoming traffic, up and over buildings. The glide and dash felt like they had a bit more juice, and when it all came together, it felt like you could never touch the ground, no issues at all, and I loved that feeling. Here in Prototype 2, the traversal, at least how I used it this time around, feels much more like it's from Hulk Ultimate Destruction, as jumping feels so damn powerful with the nerfs to gliding and dashing. I mean, you can get some serious height and cover a good amount of distance still, but it feels much heavier than before and less zippy. Hella feels like he's labouring in his movements a little more. Again, it's not bad, I still had fun traversing the city, which is visually much more interesting this time around, but the changes just don't seem necessary. Now, I've saved the stealth mechanics for last this time around because they actually tie in pretty heavily with Prototype 2's mission design. If it's not every mission, it's pretty damn close to every mission where at some point you will be using the consume and disguise mechanics. You'll be skulking around infected lairs as Blackwatch, infiltrating Gentech labs, becoming a member of a Blackwatch crew patrolling the city. There is a lot of sneaking around, and whilst I do enjoy the extra emphasis on stealth here, it's unfortunately why the mission design is a bit of a mixed bag once again, because it is very repetitious. I really enjoyed a lot of Prototype 2's missions, none being anywhere near the headache as some of the original, but they just repeat a little too often for my liking. It's a shame too, because I like the inclusion of the hunter vision and pinging a single target because it helps make Hela feel like an apex predator, or sneaking into a base undetected to try and secure some information or take out some evolved agent, but it feels like a mission loop. The reason I've bundled the mission design and the stealth into one as well is because the stealth can feel quite monotonous in its own right as you wait for a target to be all alone and stealth consume, and this can act a bit like a train as you go one after another after another. That's not to say the stealth or the missions are bad, because I still think they're big improvements over the original, but the developers definitely found missions and stealth mechanics that work well and used them as much as possible. I'll take anything over the original missions though, so whilst not perfect, they can still be good fun, like flying around in a chopper collecting scientists only to fly them sky high and jump out, or any of the Blackwatch squad disguise missions and patrolling Manhattan with this foul ragtag group, and if nothing else, these missions help the player get accustomed to their arsenal for the open world sandbox really well. Prototype 2's Manhattan is a whole lot more interesting to be in and explore than the first time around, and it's not only because visually there is actually some great variety on display, but there's more than just orbs to go out and find now. You have consumable targets littered throughout the city that have various ability and skill upgrades that are well worth your time sidetracking to go and get. You have intel files to find, groups of scientists to take out, bounty hunter contracts in a sense to sabotage Blackwatch and Gentech's ops further, infected lairs to find and destroy, the various trials that test your movement, your control in the air, combat prowess, and, well, throwing barrels in the incinerator, which I don't really enjoy but is there. The world just entices you to explore because you're either adding more to the story or you're testing your abilities, usually rewarding you with some more upgrades for your troubles. Personally, I really enjoyed the helicopter and dive bombing challenges, like way more than I probably should have, but they just broke up the gameplay cycle for me nicely. The player's imagination is always going to be Prototype's top moments, but having a world worth exploring with objectives that, yes, can be repetitive but are worth completing is a great improvement that makes me want to stick around and keep playing long after the credits have rolled. If I had to nitpick, and for me this is a nitpick related to the larger issue in the lack of combinations and abilities, but the leveling system just isn't as interesting as before. You had so much more to work towards and level up in Prototype, and that's gone here somewhat. You find more upgrades in the worlds, but the leveling up is rather standard, more just increasing damage or speed, numbers based rather than new combinations, which as I've said is sorely missed. Overall, I do think Prototype 2's gameplay is an improvement over the original, at least in regards to the main campaign. You know, going toe to toe with the original in a straight up free roam sense, it's a tough battle. Prototype 2's world and objectives within are far more interesting, but whilst the combat, the stealth and the movement are still good fun, I just don't understand why they removed so many mechanics and options from a game that can quickly fall into repetition. But if we're talking main campaign to main campaign, I had an infinite amount more fun here in Prototype 2. That doesn't mean the campaign and the mission design is perfect, because it is a very clear cycle, but I had fun with that cycle, which is something I struggle to say about the original. It's not perfect and it may not do everything better than the original, but judging as a whole, I really had a good time playing Prototype 2 from beginning to end. So, was Prototype 2 better than I remembered? Pretty obvious one here given I couldn't remember the game at all, but yes, it's much better than I thought the game was. I'd always heard Prototype 2 was a disappointment, wasn't a good game, or simply don't bother with the sequel, but I just don't see that. Prototype 2 is far from perfect, but I really enjoyed my time with the game, warts and all. Do I wish the story was more interesting? Yes. Do I wonder why they removed and gutted the ability wheel and combination system? Yes. Why did they remove the parkour-like movement? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't have issues with this game, but at the end of the day, which game did I have more fun with overall? That would be Prototype 2. I really enjoyed Hella as a main protagonist. The abilities that are here, new and old, are still great fun to use. The hijacking options are a great improvement. The difficulty, whilst on the easy side this time, is better than the alternative for this type of game. The open world is more interesting, the things to do are more compelling, and overall, I think it was the better of the two games. I'm sure I'm in the minority with that opinion, but I just enjoyed myself more in 2022 with Prototype 2 despite its issues, and I'm glad I finally went back and revisited the game today. But at the end of the day, I'm sure there's something we can all agree on. Where the hell is Prototype 3? Thank you all so much for watching my Prototype 2 retrospective. I had a great time revisiting the Prototype series, and I hope you enjoyed revisiting the games with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on Prototype 2 as well as any suggestions for games you want to see covered in the future. Shout out to the channel members Infamous Sir Hellfire, featuring Gagiano, Christian Volgag and Cloud Connection for that extra level of support. I truly do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Go give my socials a follow if you fancy, @MayorHairBear, and I'll catch you all in the next video.